fastest smartphone fingerprint scanner in the world, but actually brings some noteworthy upgrades. It has kept its gimbal stabilized main camera tech, but replaces the average IMX 766 main sensor with the world's first 50 megapixel ISOCELL GN5 sensor. It's got a new fisheye 150-degree field of view ultra-wide camera, same great telephoto lens, improved refresh rate technology thanks to its LTPO 2.0 WQHD Plus AMOLED display, latest Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 chipset, same great 120 watt wide and 50 watt wireless charging, but larger 4700 mAh battery, and most importantly, its price has remained the same. This is Tech Nick, and this is my extremely detailed full review of the iQOO 9 Pro. The iQOO 9 Pro comes in two different color variants. You can pick it up in burnt engine orange, which is actually a carbon fiber vegan leather finish, or you can pick it up in the legendary white edition, which is the version that I have, and it actually has BMW M branding on the back and is mixed up with matte glass and carbon fiber. It looks absolutely phenomenal, and slapping on that included case, which comes in the box, which is of course silicon, it really kind of makes the phone look as if it's not even using a case, since it actually matches the exact design of the phone itself. Really cool little extra touch over there. Inside the device, we are kitted with a larger 4700 mAh battery as opposed to last year's 4500 mAh cell, but we keep the same 50 watt wireless and 120 watt flash wired charging. So we're going to be doing a 1 to 100% charging test right now. Since it's advertised to do 1 to 100% in just 19 minutes, let's see if it can actually do so. We have a wattage meter at the bottom left hand corner, and it's sitting at around 40 watts at the start. Usually it hits the highest wattage peak at the start of the test. Seems like iQOO doing something different. I did make sure that all optimized charging are off on the device. Pretty much as soon as 25% hits, it jumped up to 100 watts. So it's really weird to see how it's charging. Its wattage is changing pretty strangely. It's dropped down to 70 after 80% or so, and then it dropped down even more. And we got to 100% in 22 minutes and 21 seconds, which is not the fastest that we've seen around. Though do bear in mind, this does have a larger battery than its predecessor, the iQOO 8 Pro, with a 4500 mAh battery and the same wattage charging. Did it in just 17 minutes. And while this should have technically done it a bit faster, it's still pretty quick charging time. And because of how different it used its wattage at the start and at the end, with its fastest time being in the middle, means that it actually kept cooler. It only added 20.2 degrees in Celsius as opposed to the iQOO 8 Pro's 27.3 and the iQOO 7s before it adding 30.1 degrees in Celsius. The device is of course powered by the new Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 chipset run on 4nm process node technology, and we have a new 3-dimensional 18-fold vapor chamber cooling system, as well as LPDDR5 RAM, UFS 3.1 storage, but unfortunately there is no IP68 dust and water certification. However, the display protection has bumped up to Gorilla Glass Victus, which is fantastic. You also get an aluminum frame wrapping around the device, as well as a Gorilla Glass or vegan leather back. One of the biggest improvements over its predecessor is its new camera system, since the main camera has now jumped up from an IMX 766 sensor to the world's first Samsung ISOCELL GN5 sensor. And yes, it still has gimbal stabilization. Its ultra-wide sensor has also improved, jumping up to an ISOCELL JN1 sensor, and has a crazy 150 degrees field of view, and completing the trio is a 16 megapixel telephoto sensor, which is unchanged from last year. The 150 degree field of view ultra-wide sensor takes a great crystal ball effect photo, also 50 megapixel native fisheye. We can also bin that down to 12.5, which looks even better. We have 50 megapixel ultra-wide at 119 degrees field of view, and we can bin that down too. The GN5 main sensor natively at 50 megapixel looks fantastic, even better at 12.5 thanks to AI pixel binning. 16 megapixel telephoto at 2.5 optical zoom looks pretty decent. 5 times digital zoom looks okay. 10 times is not too bad, but as soon as we hit 30 times, it's really not the best around. We do have that ultra-wide sensor, which is honestly the best thing about this device. It is a gimmick on most phones, but since we can actually record video and take 50 megapixel native stills using it within the iQOO 9 Pro, which is not apparent in other phones with the same sensor, it's actually a huge plus. If you do decide to pick up this device, it actually takes some pretty good portrait shots, I guess you could say, of myself flipping the phone around over there, and getting up close and personal to a subject using that ultra-wide camera does do a pretty great job in terms of dynamic range. And you don't have AI distortion with the 150 degree field of view mode, but you kind of want that effect for the fisheye. You can take portrait shots at 2.5x, which look great, and you can get super close with the ultra-wide sensors using the super macro mode at 119 degrees or 150 degrees field of view. They both come out crystal clear. And we also have 4K 60 FPS video recording at 150 degrees. I'm just testing out how macro would work over here in this kind of situation. There is no macro video mode, but if you get close and personal with a subject at 119 or 150 degrees field of view, it looks pretty darn good, super close up. You can also see the difference going from the main sensor to 119 degrees field of view to 150 degrees field of view. It's absolutely out of this world just walking around. And just for fun, I thought it would be pretty cool to see what a selfie video would look like using the back cameras and using that incredible 150 degree field of view ultra wide camera. I mean, look at this. This looks amazing. So many other phones out there that have released with the same sensor cannot record video with the 150 degree field of view mode. So it's really cool to see iQOO doing something different. Do bear in mind though that there is no stabilization when recording at 150 degrees field of view using the ultra wide camera. There is, however, stabilization for the 119 degrees field of view ultra wide, and both can record all the way up to 4K and 60 FPS. Most phones with regular ultra wide cameras can't even hit 4K 60. 4K 60 using the main camera over here looks pretty great. Great stabilization too, thanks to that gimbal stabilizer at the back, which the main GN5 sensor is sitting on. This is 4K 60 FPS with stabilization completely off. I'm literally sprinting over here, doing the same test with standard stabilization on now. You can see it's a lot more stable, but the quality really takes a huge knock. Now you can turn ultra stabilization on, but this is capped at 1080p 60, where the previous two modes were sitting at 4K 60, and now 1080p 30 is the max cap for horizon leveling stabilization, which only uses the ultra wide camera. We can also do 8K at 30 FPS, but this is actually a 6K upscale using the main sensor, and 8K 24, which is actually native 8K because of the native frames per second count over there. It looks pretty good, but once again, no stabilization. We can also use our telephoto lens over here to record 8K 24 or 8K 30 FPS over here. Though once again, no stabilization at 8K, it still looks nice and crispy clear. Using it at night with 2.5 times optical zoom and that telephoto lens at 30 or 24 FPS at 8K, it looks alright. It's a bit hazy. 8K 24 FPS over here using the main camera, not the telephoto this time around. Once again, it looks okay. 8K is not meant to be used at night. I would stick to 4K or 1080p as you'll see in a second. But recording 4K at 30 FPS at night is probably the sweet spot since it has stabilization. It brightens up the colors a lot. There aren't really any granules hitting the screen. It's not too pixelated. It looks okay, but it's not as steady because of the 30 FPS mode. At 60 FPS, it's nice and silky smooth over here, but it's a lot dimmer at night when recording in a low lit situation, but it still packs in loads of quality detail. Same thing can be said with 4K 60 FPS, 150 degrees field of view ultra wide mode. And when you drop it to 30, it actually reverts to 25 FPS. It's brighter, but it loses quite a bit of detail and quality. Same thing can be said with the 119 degree field of view mode. It dips down to 4K 25 FPS when shooting at 30 FPS, but you can also do 4K 60 FPS. I feel like this is the sweet spot for ultra wide at night. Though it's a bit dimmer, it seems to handle light a lot better. Taking a photo with the crystal ball mode at night with the 150 degree field of view lens looks okay. Fisheye mode you can use with night mode. You can't do it with the crystal ball mode. It makes a bit of a difference. Same thing can be said with the 119 degree field of view mode. Night off, night on, it's not much of an improvement over here. Same thing can be said with the main sensor too. It doesn't really make a drastic change over here, even though the new Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 chipset promises 5 times better night mode photography, and it's not really doing that. And when we go from 2.5 all the way up to 5 or 10 times zoom, it doesn't actually use the telephoto lens. As soon as you hit 10 times zoom, the telephoto lens then kicks in, which is super strange for night off and on, and at 30 times the same thing. But below 10 times zoom, it doesn't actually use the telephoto lens at all, which is super weird. Night mode on over here, close up and personal with the main sensor, and then portrait night mode on too, looks pretty good. And now when we use 2.5 times optical zoom, it actually uses the telephoto sensor. So the camera system may have its few drawbacks, but overall it's an incredible camera system that takes phenomenal photos and videos. We have a textured power button on the right hand side, as well as a non-split volume rocker at the bottom. We have a dual SIM 5G tray over here for 2 SIMs, that is. No expandable storage, though there is a water resistant seal. We have USB Type-C 2.0 at the bottom. So strange that there's no 3.1 speeds, and we do have dual stereo speakers with super audio over here. And at the top of the display, we have a 16 megapixel selfie cam, which is unchanged from last year. It takes some pretty crisp photos over here and takes some more than decent portrait mode shots too, though there is some bad edge detection around my hair, as you can see in most shots when using portrait mode. It doesn't do the most perfect job, but overall the detail and quality of the selfie cams are pretty decent. So I think I'm right when I say the iQOO 9 Pro is probably the best phone released this year so far. It's really shaping up to be a great device, but one huge deal breaker for me is the fact that the selfie camera can only shoot 1080p at 30 FPS. This is a flagship device from a massive company. There is no 4K or 60 FPS option when recording using the selfie cam. Nevertheless, let me know what you guys think of the audio and video quality when recording a video using the selfie cam on the brand new iQOO 9 Pro. It's really unfortunate that the selfie video is capped at 1080p and 30 FPS, and at night it looks okay because it's 30 FPS, so things are nice and bright, but not the most detailed. There is no night mode for the selfies when taking photos at night, so you can only use the flash, and the portrait mode looks really whack at night, even with the flash on. So yes, the selfie camera sensor is definitely a bit of a mixed bag. Not the best I've seen around, but it still does the job. I guess if you are a selfie enthusiast or a vlogger, this is probably not the phone for you. It is the phone for you though if you like super fast, super large, ultrasonic fingerprint sensors. This uses the Qualcomm 3D Sonic Max, the largest and fastest in the world. And to set it up, you literally just tap, give one jab on your screen, and you've registered your fingerprints. You can change the size of the area as well as the animation. There are a bunch of different animation styles which you can change within different wallpapers too. It is 0.2 seconds in speed as opposed to 0.5 seconds for the ultrasonic Gen 2 that we saw in last year's Samsung. And it is 9 times bigger than the size of the one that we saw within the S21 series last year. It is 20 by 30 millimeters in size, which is absolutely enormous. There are loads of different always on display options for you to choose from, and when it is being displayed, it displays at 1 Hertz thanks to that new LTPO 2.0 tech. We do have 2D face unlock here, which utilizes the selfie camera. It's not 3D face unlock, unfortunately, but it still gets the job done. And the display is largely similar to last year's. It is a 6.78 inch E5 AMOLED display, which is curved, though subtle curves. It has a resolution of WQHD plus and a PPI of 518. It has 1.07 billion colors, HDR10 plus support, 112% DCI-P3 and 140% sRGB wide color gamut rating, and 1500 nits of peak brightness, which is once again unchanged. We have a screen to body ratio of 89.6% thanks to pretty symmetrical bezels from left to right and top to bottom, and aiding in that wonderful 1440p resolution display is the new low temperature polycrystalline oxide display, which can refresh between 1 and 120 Hertz. And using an FPS counter over here with that LTPO 2.0 technology, you can see that frames pretty much go down to 0 or 1 frame most of the time when the phone is not being used and is just still. But when you're moving it around, it adjusts and goes up to 120, or it goes to 60 or 90, so on and so forth. And we also have 300 Hertz touch sampling rates, though it's not hitting the thousands that we've seen from very recent BBK electronic made devices. 300 Hertz is still more than enough, and LTPO 2.0 technology is actually working perfectly fine on this device. We obviously can change the brightness levels. We have eye protection if you want to read late at night. We do have different screen color options as well as adaptive color display and visual enhancements too, as well as dark mode, which you can have scheduled, and you can also adjust if you want it to be a lighter dark mode or a darker dark mode. It has nice deep blacks and adjusts your wallpaper and widgets too. It can be used for third-party apps as well as a bunch of first-party apps as well. And flicking back to the lighter side of things, we do have Origin OS Ocean skinned over Android 12 in terms of software. It is absolutely phenomenal and kind of looks like a mix between Android and Harmony OS and iOS. It's a bunch of all of them mixed up together, and I absolutely love it. There are loads of different customization options. You can even change the color of your control sensor. You can group things together within your app drawer. You can go to nano kits within your app drawer so that you can get widgets more easily. There are a load of different first-party widgets, and you can go down to your extra widgets for all your apps. You can also adjust to a 5:9 home screen app layout, and we do have something called Mood Cube in order to quickly change your wallpaper on the fly as well as your themes on the fly. You can change window styles to have your wallpaper blurred or monochrome, or add a sky so that it picks up the weather that's currently happening or the time. So the sun rays are shooting at your screen at different parts of the day so that you kind of have a gist of the time. We can change icons. We can change the rounded or square corner boxy looking things within the control center. We can link and unlink apps on the home screen. We can get shortcuts coming through those as well as peek at our performance. We can also adjust app icon sizes as well as folder icon sizes. We can change the color of folders over here too, though you can't just tap on an icon within the folder to go into it. You always have to open up the folder. You can adjust how it looks when you're in the recents tab. You can also jump into split screen. And once you're in split screen, you can switch between the top and bottom app. And you can also create a combined split screen icon on your home screen so it automatically reopens that split screen going forward if you ever use those two pretty often. You can also go into a floating window and pin an app to the side, though if you open a second one, it can only pin one. You can't have two pinned apps on the right-hand side of your device. And the haptics are absolutely phenomenal, pretty much the best that you can get around. But what about the audio? We are kitted with dual stereo speakers and of course super audio built in. So how does it stack up against the Xiaomi 12 Pro on the left and OnePlus 10 Pro on the right? The speakers sound fantastic when playing music, but what about playing games? Let's go ahead and give them a listen. When in a game, you can pull in from the left for Ultra Game Mode Overlay, and you can open up small windows such as Calculator app over there. You have game tools to enhance the display, and we also have performance tools so we can go into Monster Mode, which is the huge performance boost that this phone has to offer, as well as 120 FPS mode. Though this game, Genshin Impact, that we're starting off with here is capped at 60. So even though the phone can go up to 120, the game itself is capped at 60. So the max that we could get is 60. And we're getting an average between 33 and 60 FPS, which is okay. The average Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 on my channel sits between 34 and 58. So I guess it's on par with those. I guess it's kind of more to blame Qualcomm than it is to blame iQOO over here. And when it comes to Bullet Force, even though we have 120 FPS mode enabled, we're capping at 60, even though this game has an unlimited frames cap, and most phones on my channel running the new Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 chipset are sitting between 113 and 122. Even though this phone can easily hit 120 FPS in this game, it is capping at 60. Hopefully this changes with a future software update. Same thing can be said with Real Racing 3 over here. Once again, another game that has no restriction in terms of frames per second cap, but this device is capping it at 60. Now, this has nothing to do with Qualcomm or its display. This has to do with the software implemented within iQOO's Origin OS Ocean. Hopefully, this is changed going forward. We do have 12 gigs of LPDDR5 RAM that can be bumped up to 16 gigs using extended RAM, though do bear in mind that uses UFS 3.1 storage. And we are kitted, of course, with 4nm process node technology driven chipset, the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1, which is supposedly 20% more powerful and 30% more power efficient. But what does that mean in terms of benchmarks? Well, we're going to enable the monster mode within the battery settings over here so that we can get the absolute best results. We're also going to be testing out the battery percentage as well as the temperature at the start of the test. We'll compare this at the end of the 3 benchmarks, and we're kickstarting things off here with Antutu version 9.2.9 to test out GPU and CPU. And now we're going to be going into Geekbench version 5.4.4 to test out just CPU, and ending things off with 3D Mark Wildlife to end off with just GPU testing. And getting to the battery results at the end, we drained by 10% with a 31.33 mAh per minute drain rate, which is a tad less than the average Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 powered smartphone that I've tested in the same test on my channel, but the temperature was a lot cooler on the iQOO 9 Pro, only adding 16.5 degrees in Celsius as opposed to the average addition of 25 degrees in Celsius. When it comes to Antutu, the iQOO 9 Pro scored a crazy 1,030,395 points, which pretty much leaves every single other Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 powered smartphone in the dust. But when it comes to CPU benchmarking using Geekbench version 5 over here, it didn't quite get the highest single core score at 1241, which is actually only 20 points away from the top leading dog over here, the OnePlus 10 Pro, but its multi-core score got a score of 3,824, which is heaps ahead of the rest of the devices here. And when it comes to 3D Mark Wildlife, it sits slap bang in the middle of the pack of all Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 powered smartphones, getting an average frames per second of 58.6. The iQOO 9 Pro has a subjectively good-looking design thanks to its BMW M-branded backplate that has a carbon fiber matte glass finish. And while the camera bump on its back doesn't protrude all that much, it's absolutely enormous, and unnecessarily so since there is no rear display here. However, inside that huge camera visor sits 3 incredible sensors. The main 50 megapixel GN5 sensor takes some of the best photos and videos I've ever seen on a smartphone, not to mention it has gimbal stabilization. The 50 megapixel 150 degree field of view ultra-wide camera is fun to use and can actually record 150 degree videos all the way up to 4K 60 FPS. And its 16 megapixel telephoto lens, while not upgraded since last year, still takes some very detailed optically zoomed shots. Underneath the display sits the largest and fastest fingerprint sensor in the world, the 3D Sonic Max. And while the selfie camera is not under the display and is unchanged from its predecessor, still takes more than decent pictures, but unfortunately lacks night mode and caps video at 1080p 30 FPS. Once in the device, we are kitted with Origin OS Ocean skinned over Android 12, which is largely similar to Origin OS 1.0, but ditches the parallel world feature which previously allowed us to use regular FunTouch OS for a more typical Android experience. This is a bold move since Origin OS is a bit of a learning curve, but it's still excellent software that packs in more features and customizations than you could ever begin to imagine. We get loads of LPDDR5 RAM on board, and iQOO's latest flagship is powered by the new 4nm run Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 chipset, which aids in a smooth user experience thanks to LTPO 2.0 technology that allows the display to refresh between 1 and 120 Hz. Gaming on the iQOO 9 Pro is a bit of a mixed bag. It plays most games at stable frame rates, but seems to cap high refresh rate games at 60 FPS, which I truly hope is fixed in future software updates. The display is identical to its predecessor, which is not necessarily a bad thing, since it packs in WQHD plus resolution, 1 billion colors, 112% DCI-P3, and 140% sRGB coverage, and 1500 nits of brightness. Not to mention, it now uses a second generation, low temperature polycrystalline oxide display refresh rate technology. Charging wattage has remained the same at 50 watt wireless and 120 watt wired, but it only managed to reach a peak of 100 watts in my wired charging test, which yielded a slightly longer charging time than its predecessor, but it managed to stay significantly cooler in terms of temperature gained, and also houses a larger 4700 mAh battery cell, which makes it easy for me to not only recommend the iQOO 9 Pro as a great upgrade over its predecessor, but as the best flagship smartphone to release in 2022 so far.